Penny Hardaway, University of Memphis men's basketball coach, conducted a Q&A with John Rothstein this week, and it appears to be in response to the criticism levied at the seventh-year coach after four more assistant coaches were removed from the program last week. And while the university acknowledged receiving an anonymous letter alleging major rules violations by both Penny Hardaway and various members of his staff. Big Bet Bennett, I'm assuming at this point you've read the anonymous letter.
Yes.
I assume you read my column on Penny, perhaps even Penny's Q&A with John Rothstein. Just as somebody who's wearing a Memphis hat right now, who cares about this place and that program deeply, what do you make of the current state of Tiger basketball?
And I did all of the above. One thing that I said last weekend, starting with the letter, I will just say obviously the allegations are serious. Not a big fan of anonymous letters. That's my personal opinion. I think someone should put their name on it if they're levying these big-time allegations against the basketball program. So that's how I feel about the anonymous letter.
I got, just for the spirit of transparency, I received this letter a while back.
I take it a lot of people saw this letter a while back, or some people saw this letter a while back.
Yeah,
yes.
I've had it for a while.
Yep.
I found it interesting.
Yep.
Also, there's not proof of anything in the letter. It's just
allegations.
I could type the same things and send them to somebody and take a picture of a guy looking at money and say, this is what this means. But really, it could just be a guy looking at money. I mean, I want to be clear. I'm not dismissive of it. It's pretty detailed. I find it hard to believe somebody just made all this stuff up. But the idea that this letter is proof of anything, it's just not true.
Yeah.
At least not the letter that I have seen. That said, it is troubling, if only because it's another negative headline in a long list of negative headlines. But you can continue.
Yeah, no, I read your story, and I agree with all the points pretty much you made in the story. I think, too, it's worth pointing out that you said multiple times in your story that you did not think that this should be the end of the Penny Hardaway era at the University of Memphis. I think that's worth mentioning. I think some people don't actually read things before they comment on them, but it is obviously not good to have negative headlines over and over and over again relating to the university, like firing all the assistant coaches or parting ways, before the season starts. That's just another thing that pops up and you're like, oh God, it's why does this stuff keep happening? Why do these stories keep popping up? So it's obviously concerning. But as far as is it going to go anywhere? Does it mean anything? I don't know how much it means necessarily in the grand scheme of things. I think Penny needs to win basketball games this season. That's what I think.
In, again, spirit of transparency, as I think most people know, I was on vacation last week.
Yeah.
I wasn't planning on talking or typing at all. And then as the week unfolds, I'm in one place vacationing with wife and kids, another place vacationing with wife and friends. In between that, what starts to happen is the biggest college basketball story, or at least the biggest headlines connected to the sport that are materializing, are originating in my hometown, at my alma mater. I'm connected to a coach that I've obviously written and talked a lot about over the years. And so nobody was like, come off a vacation and write this column.
Right.
But I did feel compelled to chime in. You need to say something. If you weren't on vacation, would you say something? And the answer is yes.
Right.
And so I could have just said, I'm on vacation, I'll let somebody else deal with it. But I did feel like, because I'm not just a college basketball columnist or college basketball analyst or podcast host, but I am someone who grew up here as a fan of that program, who went to school there, who was a former beat writer, who very publicly campaigned for this man to get the job and for the previous coach to be fired. I felt like I wasn't obligated, but I was moved to write something. And so then it just comes down to, what are you going to write? What are you going to say? Because you can write something about anything. I'm not really impressed by that. What are you going to say? Say something. What will you say? And I just told the truth about how I feel, not just as somebody watching all of this unfold as a college basketball columnist or analyst, but as somebody who cares about that place and who did very publicly campaign for Penny Hardaway to be the coach. If I'm being completely honest with you, if I could rewrite it, like if I'd have a second shot at it, I would write it a little differently. I don't like the way I did everything in that column. Particularly, I don't like the way I very definitively said I was wrong when I said fire Tubby Smith and hire Penny Hardaway. Because I think that's a little too harsh, honestly, in regard to Penny and myself. I don't think I was totally wrong. I think it was a good idea, backed with solid rationale. And it did get off to a good start. Mm-hmm. The attendance problems that I referenced and insisted Penny would fix, he fixed them. The recruiting problems that I highlighted as issues and predicted he would fix, he fixed those. It got off to a good, it's not like a disaster like Clyde Drexler at Houston or Kenny Payne at Louisville. Those were disasters. This isn't that. So if I could go, because people really latched onto that sentence, I was wrong. And if I could go back and rewrite it, I wouldn't write it that way. Because I don't think it was a wrong idea. It's just a good idea that isn't going well or isn't going as smoothly as I would have hoped or anticipated. First, just because of the constant turnover with rosters and staffs. And I know that there's a lot of roster turnover in college basketball now because of the transfer portal and name, image, and likeness. But this is unusual. Even in this era of college basketball, what has gone on at Memphis from a roster perspective is unusual. Like bringing back one player, bringing in 7 transfers, losing for whatever reason, either your choice or somebody else's, losing the majority of your staff again. And if you ever talk to people who have run through that program over the past 6 years, people who have been assistant coaches and then, yes, sometimes left for bigger and better things, but not always. They don't look back on the experience fondly. They look back on it like, well, that was something. And there's just so many of them at this point. And the point I tried to make with the column is that it's just exhausting if you're a Tiger basketball fan. You don't know who the coaches are anymore. You don't know who the players are anymore. And your head coach, who is somebody you've long loved and admired, is constantly being accused of stuff you don't want your coach being accused of, constantly being investigated. He has served more games suspended than he has won NCAA tournament games. And now here we are again. And I'm with you, this anonymous letter may amount to nothing, but the University of Memphis did have to hand it over to the NCAA, did have to acknowledge its existence, and it did create national headlines everywhere. You don't want this.
Right.
This is not the proper way to run a high major basketball program that doubles as a multi-million-dollar business. That's what this really is. Penny Hardaway is the CEO of a multi-million-dollar business. And respectfully, because I'm not trying to make it personal or take shots, this is a man I looked up to when I was a child, a man I still like on a personal level, whether he likes me or not. He's not doing a good job running a multi-million-dollar business right now. It is too chaotic and too all over the place. And so the column posted. It's there for everybody to consume. Whether it is what moved Penny to agree to do a Q&A with John Rothstein or not, I can't speak to that. I intentionally didn't even ask John about it. But Penny Hardaway did, subsequent to my column, do a Q&A with John Rothstein. And it was interesting, defensive on some level, but I understand this. I can get defensive myself sometimes. And I understand what it must, or at least I think I can understand what it must be like to be Penny Hardaway, somebody who has been admired and put on a pedestal in the city since you were like 16, 17 years old, without exception. And now over these past couple of years, some of the same people who have loved you and rallied for you and believed in you are now standing up and saying, I don't know if I believe in this anymore. I don't know if I like this anymore. That would be tough to deal with. I'm not Penny Hardaway, but I imagine that would be tough to deal with. So I can understand him being a little defensive or a lot defensive. I'm not even mad at him. But the one thing I would want to focus on, just to try to hammer home a point where I do believe, again, respectfully, he's a little misguided, is at one point in the Q&A with John, he's just, I don't want to say ranting and raving because it's a text Q&A. I can't speak to the tone of it. I didn't hear it. But he's getting a little defensive about the criticism directed his way through 6 years as head coach at his alma mater. And he's talking about how I'm having to learn as I go, and I wanted to run an NBA program. Now I'm trying to run more of a college. And he's got all these explanations. Let's call them explanations for why things maybe have been a little bumpy when they shouldn't have. Whether you believe him or not, that's up to you. I don't care. But at one point he says, I'd love for you guys, and he's saying this to John, so I'm assuming he means media members. I'd love for you guys to put my first 6 years against other people's first 6 years and tell me how it turns out. That's the quote. I'd love for you guys, as he's defending himself against criticism of his job performance through 6 years as head coach at his alma mater, he says, what I would love is for you guys to put my first 6 years against other people's first 6 years and see how it turns out. Well, lucky for us, I'd done this before. I did it last March. And I keep my notes. So I didn't even have to go do this again. I just had to go find my notes from back then and just make sure they were updated and correct. And I actually did exactly what Penny told me and told John Rothstein he wishes media members would do, right? And I don't know that anybody is successful, broadly speaking, as Penny Hardaway needs to take advice from somebody like me. But if he's willing to, here's what I would say. Don't ever say that again. Because when people actually start to look at your first 6 years and compare them to other people's first 6 years, it doesn't compare so well. It's not what you think it is. I've done this before, so if you already know all this, bear with me. But Dana Kirk got the Memphis job in 1979. This basically covers my entire life. It does cover your entire life. It largely covers Penny Hardaway's entire life. When we mostly think of Tiger basketball, somebody around my age, it starts with, I know it didn't start with Dana Kirk, but that was my introduction to Tiger basketball.
Gotcha.
So 45 years ago, Dana Kirk gets the Memphis State job. Since then, there have been 7 full-time Memphis coaches. 7 full-time. You could probably name them off the top of your head. Yep. If not, I'll help you. Dana Kirk, Larry Finch, Tick Price, John Calipari, Josh Pastner, Tubby Smith, Penny Hardaway. 2 of them, Tick and Tubby, were fired after 2 seasons for different reasons. With Tick, it was because of a scandal, inappropriate relationship. With Tubby, it was because of a number of things. Among them, the fact that FedEx Forum during home games had become nearly empty.
Yeah, people didn't care anymore.
They had a money problem, an attendance problem that needed to be fixed. It could only be fixed by firing Tubby Smith. So 2 of these past 7 coaches have been fired after 2 seasons. The other 5 all made it to at least year 6. They all at least completed 6 years. And this is just a fact. Penny Hardaway is unequivocally the least accomplished of any of them through his first 6 years as head coach at Memphis. I can show you this a lot of different ways. Here's the simplest. Through 6 seasons as a head coach at Memphis, Dana Kirk made 4 NCAA tournaments and won 11 games in the tournament. Josh Pastner made 4 NCAA tournaments in his first 6 years. 2 wins. Larry Finch, 3 NCAA tournaments in his first 6 years, and it would have been 4, but he was ineligible year 1 because of the Dana Kirk scandal. But still, facts are facts. Let's call it 3. NCAA tournament appearances in the first 6 years, 4 NCAA tournament wins. John Calipari, 3 NCAA tournament appearances in his first 6 years, 4 NCAA tournament wins. Penny Hardaway, 2 NCAA tournament appearances in his first 6 years, 1 win. Of the 5 coaches who have made it at least 6 years since 1979 at either Memphis State or the University of Memphis, Penny Hardaway has been to fewer NCAA tournaments in his first 6 years and 1 fewer NCAA tournament games in his first 6 years. Those are facts. Dana Kirk ended up lasting 7 years at Memphis State. Again, first 6 years, let me run you through it. 4 NCAA tournaments, 11 NCAA tournament wins, 3 conference championships, 3 conference tournament championships, 4 Sweet 16s, 1 Elite 8, 1 Final Four. That's Dana Kirk. Penny's first 6 years don't compare well to that. Then came Larry Finch. Spent 11 years at Memphis. 3 NCAA tournaments in his first 6 years. Would have been 4. Got 4 NCAA tournament wins in his first 6 years, 1 conference tournament championship, 1 Sweet 16, 1 Elite 8. You can take any 6-year period of the Larry Finch era. The first 6 years, the last 6 years, any 6 years in the middle, they're better than the first 6 years of Penny Hardaway. They're more accomplished. Tick Price, we know, was fired after 2 seasons. We'll skip that. John Calipari spent 9 years at Memphis. In the first 6, 3 NCAA tournaments, 4 NCAA tournament wins, 2 conference titles, 1 conference tournament title, 1 Sweet 16, 1 Elite 8. Josh Pastner lasted 7 years at Memphis, was pushed out after 7. But in the first 6, 4 NCAA tournament appearances, 2 NCAA tournament wins, 2 conference championships, 3 conference tournament titles. What are we talking about?
Yeah,
my advice, don't ever ask somebody to go look at your first 6 years and compare them to other people's first 6 years when over the past 45 years at the place you're working, every other dude who made it at least 6 years accomplished more in 6 years than you. Maybe they didn't get as many number 1 recruiting classes as you, but they accomplished more as you. It's just a fact.
Now, if I can make an excuse for him, there was 2 major events or things that happened during his tenure, which was one, COVID, which
happened to every program in America.
Everybody. I'm with you. That happened to everybody. And 2, NIL happened when he
happened to everybody.
That's fair. But it didn't happen to those previous Memphis coaches.
That's fair.
When you're comparing those records.
Also, they weren't able to go out and enroll number 1 recruiting classes in a mid-major league. Do you realize he spent 6 years in a mid-major conference with high major players and has never won it?
That's tough. Like you've got to. And now I will say, before last season, like, there have been I do think he's a good coach because there have been things to point to that suggest that. Like, you remember the first 3-4 seasons, we were all saying, like, they got a defensive identity.
Last January, we were saying it.
They have a defensive identity. Now, that team last year just completely fell apart. Like, that was a absolute disaster. There's no defending what happened last season. Even the loss of Caleb Mills, I just don't think that excuses the season playing out the way that it did. I mean, that's one player. That team went from good, you lose him, good player, but they just fell off a cliff. Like, that's
Caleb Mills was an important piece. He's not Kevin Durant.
Right.
Relax.
Right. So that and the injury excuse, I don't know about that. But I do want to see this upcoming season with this group. Again, this is his group that he went out and got. Brand new team, brand new look. We'll see. I hope that they can get back to that defensive identity that he has had in past, in past teams, in past Memphis teams.
They might be able to. I'm not ruling it out.
Yeah.
You ready for this? They still have high major players in a mid-major conference.
Right. You should be able to
win your league.
Win the league. I'm with you 100% on that.
Yeah. And that's why I'm not saying pull the trigger now, and I'm not saying there's no way this is going to get better. He has high major players in a mid-major league. You should win it.
Yeah,
I mean, you should
be able to get to the
it.
tournament. Yeah,
you should have already won it.
I'm with you.
This year's a new year, and you still got the best roster in your league by a wide margin. But it is an unusual roster, and it's not the roster or the type of roster people have been winning with in college basketball. There's a Twitter account, College Basketball Report, and last February, early March, they posted this, and I bookmarked it because I knew it would be something I'd come back and reference all the time. Last year, there were a handful of teams that basically everybody takes transfers now. Not everybody, but basically everybody. But there were a handful of teams that took 7 or more. That's a lot. Mm-hmm. And what this Twitter account devoted to covering college basketball highlighted is that the schools that took at least 7 transfers heading into last season, I'll just tell you who they were. Arkansas, disaster. Mm-hmm. Disaster of a season.
It was.
Arizona State, not good. Memphis.
Yep.
UCF, whatever. West Virginia, not good. Penn State, not good. St. John's missed the NCAA tournament. The only team in the entire country that took 7 or more transfers last season and made the NCAA tournament was NC State. And you might remember, they only made it because they won the ACC tournament.
Oh, that's right. They had that big run.
And then they went to the Final Four.
Yeah.
But they were, if somebody didn't bank in a shot, they are eliminated in the ACC tournament and they missed the NCAA tournament. And then every team in the country that took 7+ transfers would have missed the NCAA tournament last year. The only one that made it was NC State, and that's because they got an auto bid by winning the tournament. They got hot at the right time. Mm-hmm. Every other team stunk relative to expectations. Well, guess how many transfers Memphis got coming in this season?
A lot.
7 more.
Yeah.
7 more.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that the team can't be good. I'm just telling you, we have data on this.
It's unusual.
And teams that were built this way, they didn't have offensive identity, defensive identity. They were largely not good. And now here's Penny Hardaway building another team that way and doing it with what is largely an entire new staff as well. This isn't like Mark Pope at Kentucky having to take a bunch of transfers, or John Calipari at Arkansas having to take a lot of transfers. John Calipari took over Arkansas, and there was quite literally nothing there.
Yep.
Mark Pope took over Kentucky, and there's basically nothing there. You have to do what you have to do. Penny's heading into year 7, and there's still no stability whatsoever with the roster, with the staff. That's a problem. It doesn't guarantee a lack of success, but it does suggest it's way harder to achieve it this way than it is in a more traditional way. You shouldn't be heading into year 7 firing 4 coaches in September and basically trying to do it all again with a brand new roster. This isn't normal. It's just not normal. Doesn't mean it can't work. It means it usually doesn't work. But it's not normal. And sometimes I think people here have a tendency to normalize abnormal things just because you care about it so much, or you want it to be something so much. But I can't tell you how many Memphis fans, I've written columns critical of Penny Hardaway before, of Memphis before. I don't always end up on the popular side of these conversations because the audience is emotionally invested in it in a way that sometimes they can't see it clearly. This column was not received that way. Not a lot of pushback on this one from Memphis fans. I can't tell you how many Memphis fans, and I'm talking about people who sit on the first few rows, people who have given way more to that program than I ever have financially, like real money people who care deeply about this place, who care deeply about Penny Hardaway. And they didn't hate that column. I can't tell you how many texts I got, tweets I got. This is the way I feel. You've explained how I'm feeling right now. I had high hopes, but I'm just tired. I had high expectations. I still do. But my God, another investigation, another NCAA situation, another brand new roster, 4 more coaches moving on. What are we doing? Go look at the best programs in America. They are not run this way. Go look at who Bill Self's staff members are. They'll look familiar because they've been there for a minute. Go look at the staff Dan Hurley used to win a national championship last year or the year before. Now go look at his staff right now. It's the same dudes. This isn't normal. And I hope there's a way for Penny to recognize this isn't normal, probably not effective, and to stabilize it and fix it. That's still my hope. I'd love to write the column in February that says, boy, Penny Hardaway looked like he was up against it in September, but now look, with a brand new staff and a brand new roster, he's got the 5th best team in the country according to the AP poll. I'll write that column, I promise. But this ain't usually the way to get there. And just to circle back to the quote that he delivered to Rothstein about how I wish you guys would go look at other people's first 6 years, compare them to mine, see how that goes. Well, I just did it with Memphis basketball coaches. That's a pretty good comp. I'm not comparing Memphis basketball coaches to Kentucky basketball coaches or UCLA basketball coaches. Just like, hey, this is the place. where other people have held the same job. Here's what they've done through 6 years. Here's what you've done through 6 years. I just showed you he's the least accomplished coach of the past 45 years at Memphis among coaches who have gotten at least 6 years. You can't even argue that. But if you want to look outside of Memphis for another sort of comparable situation, well, there is one. And it was at Michigan, and it involved Juwan Howard. Juwan Howard's a member of the Fab Five. Perhaps not the most famous member of the Fab Five. It's probably Chris Webber. Mm-hmm. But he's Juwan Howard, member of the Fab Five, longtime NBA player, played in back-to-back Final Fours, and then a little bit like Penny, without having ever worked in college basketball at all, was given an opportunity to be the head coach at his alma mater. That's Juwan Howard. And he lasted 5 years. He's already fired. Got fired after last season. They fired him. He didn't resign. They fired him. And you ready for this? Didn't even get 6 seasons, all right? But through 5, after which he was fired, through 5 he had accomplished more than Penny Hardaway's accomplished in 6. Juwan Howard in 5 years, 2 NCAA tournament appearances, same amount as Penny, 5 NCAA tournament wins, that's 4 more, 1 conference championship, that's 1 more, AP National Coach of the Year in 2021, fired in 2024 after 5 years. Had accomplished more on the court, but got fired after 5 years. Why? You know what they said? We're tired of this. It's just one goofy headline after another. You're getting into a scuffle in a handshake line against Wisconsin. You're in a verbal, possibly physical altercation with a strength coach. You're constantly popping off. No, you haven't run this into the ground. You were the AP Coach of the Year 3 years ago. You've won 5 games in the NCAA tournament. That's 5 times more than Penny Hardaway. But you know what they still said? This is too silly. This is not the way you run a high major program. It's time to move on. And they did it. So when Penny wants to start comparing his first 6 years to other people's, go compare yourself to any other Memphis coach that lasted 6 years in my entire lifetime. It doesn't measure up. Go compare yourself to Juwan Howard. Proud alum, NBA great, got a chance to be the coach of his alma mater. He's already fired after accomplishing more than Penny has accomplished at Memphis. Why? Because it just got too goofy. Yo, man, this is crazy. Bring me Dusty May. He seems calm. Let's do that. Here's the truth. Penny talked to John Rothstein and answered a series of questions and implied, if not definitively said, he thinks he's been wronged with the criticism, thinks it's unfair, doesn't even really understand where it's coming from or why. And here's the truth. If he were named any other thing than Penny Hardaway, Josh Smith, Josh Pastner, or even Larry Finch, he would already have been moved on. That's the truth. It is incredible and an incredible testament to how much people want him to succeed and how much people care about him that he's still the coach at Memphis. Because if not for those things, he wouldn't be. If not for those things, somebody else would already be the head coach at the University of Memphis. I know accepting criticism must be difficult for somebody as famous and successful and loved as him. I would struggle with it too if I were him. I struggle with it and I'm just me. But the criticism is not unfair and it's not harsh. In fact, at least here locally, he's been handled with kids' gloves a lot. Think about all the banana stuff. Popping off at reporters, popping off about other college coaches, 5-star recruits, coming here late, leaving in the middle of the season, returning. It's bananas. None of this is normal. And nobody else at the University of Memphis could survive this. Nobody other than Penny Hardaway. He is one of one. There is nobody else on this world who could survive the things he's being asked to survive as the head coach of the University of Memphis other than Penny Hardaway. I wish he understood that. I wish rather than sitting around thinking everybody's out to get me, because nobody's out to get you. Nobody. Instead of thinking everybody's out to get you, understand you're lucky to still have this job. And if you want to keep it, it's time to stabilize things and get this thing back on the right track, because right now, it appears mostly off the rails.
The Gary Parrish Show, live weekdays at 10 a.m.